I'm not sure I see that going down particularly well in the Western world right now.
It's been a very controversial subject of discussion, what exactly is meant there. I'm inclined to agree with those people who argue that it's not literally meant a kind of biological transformation from a woman into a man, but rather in general in the ancient world, maleness, and not just human maleness, but male as a concept was understood as being more complete, more perfect than femaleness. It partly was a male chauvinistic society. And so that what's being said here is that any person, and especially any woman, who becomes a more complete or a perfect human being will enter into the kingdom of heaven.
Scholarly debate has raged over the historical accuracy of Thomas's Gospel, and much of the argument has concentrated on its date. Although the physical manuscript of Thomas can be dated to the early 4th century, there's speculation that the content of the Gospel is far older. The logic goes that if it was written in the 1st century, it could well be earlier than the canonical Gospels. And if that's the case, it's the nearest we'll ever get to the historical Jesus. So is this the earliest information about Jesus that we have?
It could be, because this form, nothing but a series of teachings of Jesus, a few very simple narrative frameworks, but no biographical information whatsoever, whereas the canonical Gospels, especially Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are cast as a kind of biography of Jesus. This form, transmitting simply what Jesus said, what he taught, is what scholars have for hundreds of years assumed was the more original form of the Gospel as the message of Jesus. So the Gospel of Thomas, certainly according to its form, could well be historically older, earlier than any of the Gospels in the Bible.
The fact that so many fragments of the Gospel of Thomas have been found also suggests that, as well as being early, it was widely read. And the good condition of the Nag Hammadi text in particular was because it was written on the best quality papyri, save for the books that were highly valued. So what exactly was it about the Gospel of Thomas that led to its exclusion from the New Testament? On the surface, a text that contains the sayings of Jesus hardly seems controversial, and yet even though I studied at theological college, I wasn't taught about it. Well, there's a hint in that very first saying in the book. The Gospel starts, "These are the hidden sayings that the living Jesus spoke and that Didymus Judas Thomas wrote down. And he said, whoever finds the correct interpretation of these sayings will never die." And when you read Thomas, this hiddenness is immediately apparent. The Gospel is straightforward. It's though it's been written to be deliberately obscure, sayings such as, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." Their meaning is cryptic. It's also compelling. In fact, these pithy aphorisms were riddles, waiting to be decoded. But this wasn't just a word game. Those who successfully deciphered the code would be rewarded with immortality. And it was exactly the secrecy of the sayings and what they promised that the Orthodox leaders of the Church found so disquieting. I wanted to know about the promise of eternal life held in these enigmatic teachings, and about the people who believed in them. So I joined Bart Ehrman for a glimpse of the forgotten world in which Thomas once flourished.
شايفين الناس اللي عايزه تشيش دي كرازه. اول مره تشوف في حياتك دول دي التكريس بقى. شايف واحد راجل عجوز بيكرز.
This
gospel emphasizes the importance of secret knowledge for salvation. The key to salvation, according to the Gospel of Thomas, is by learning the secret teachings of Jesus and knowing what they meant. There were groups of Christians in the early church known as Gnostic Christians. They were called Gnostics because the Greek word for knowledge is gnosis. They were the Christians who knew, who had the secret knowledge that brings about salvation. In my opinion, the Gospel of Thomas is a Gnostic gospel propounding a set of beliefs that if people can understand, they'll have eternal life.
Religion as being, full of secret teachings. Why did the early church leaders find that so disturbing?
Because the way of salvation that's taught in this gospel stood at odds with the way of salvation taught by what became traditional Christianity. According to these church fathers, salvation was open to everybody, high and low, intelligent, unintelligent, rich and poor, anybody who believed in the death and resurrection of Jesus. But according to these texts, it's only people in the know, only the inside group, those who had esoteric knowledge who could have salvation.
الكلام بيقول لك ايه؟ ان هذا الكتاب بيقول الخلاص للناس الذين عندهم علم، لخاصة من الناس، مش لكل الناس. خاصة بس. الكلام ده موجود في الانجيل. موجود في الانجيل. ماذا قال يسوع التعليم للتلاميذ لغير التلاميذ بالايه؟ بالامثال. فقال لهم قد اعطي لكم ان تعرفوا سر ملكوت الله، واما الذين من خارج فبالامثال يكون لهم كل شيء، لكي يبصروا مبصرين ولا ينظروا ويسمعون سامعين ولا يفهموا لئلا يرجعوا فتغفر لهم خطاياهم. المعرفة والخلاص للتلاميذ، غير التلاميذ لا. تاني فقال لهم قد أعطي لكم أن تعرفوا سر ملكوت الله، وإما الذين هم من خارج فبالأمثال يكون لهم كل شيء، لكي يبصروا مبصرين ولا ينظروا ويسمعوا سامعين ولا يفهموا لئلا يرجعوا فتغفر لهم خطاياهم. متعمد عمد يسوع الناس ما تفهمش حتى لا تغفر لهم خطاياهم، حتى لا يكون لهم خلاص. متعمد ضلال الناس، متعمد ضلال الناس، متعمد على ضلال الناس.
This is a very different understanding of salvation that can cut at the very root of what early Christianity was all about.
Today, Christians universally accept it's Jesus' resurrection and not just the interpretation of his teachings that leads to eternal life. But the Gospel of Thomas reveals that in the 3rd and 4th centuries it wasn't so clear-cut. I can see how a gospel that promised salvation through Jesus' teachings alone could well be very, very popular. In the rational world of the 21st century, a text which plays down the more unbelievable elements of his life, his miracles, his being raised from the dead, could be very attractive. But the world of the early Christians was very, very different. And there was one reason in particular why early Orthodox Christian leaders wanted to believe that it was Jesus' victory over death that was the only path to salvation. In the 3rd and 4th centuries, Christians throughout the Roman world, even those here in Egypt, suffered persecution. Their refusal to worship other gods and their persistence in flaunting their own beliefs created tensions and suspicions, and thousands were killed for their faith. And for these Christians living in fear, there was one aspect of Jesus' life that in particular sustained them, and it was his suffering on the cross, but more importantly, the knowledge that on the other side of that suffering lay redemption, the resurrection. Jesus was a role model. If he had suffered and been resurrected, then their own suffering had a purpose. A gospel which placed no importance on Jesus' death and physical resurrection, like Thomas, was never going to provide reassurance to those facing martyrdom. And it's no surprise that Gnostic Christians were well known for not being prepared to die for their faith. It's for this reason that for many groups of Christians the Gospel of Thomas is so subversive. A Jesus who is a teacher of wise words is all very well and good, but it's not worth risking your life for. And unless Christians were willing to stand up for, and in some cases